Recording in progress.
All right, y'all. So we're going to be finishing up session 18 today, the Law of One. And before we get into the reading, I just want to take a moment to send my gratitude to those of Ra and the LL Research Group. Without their efforts, we would not be able to study this material. We wouldn't have it. It wouldn't be a part of our, it wouldn't be part of our lives. And I'm so grateful that this material is part of my life and that y'all are part of my life. And so huge gratitude to Ra and to LL, Carla, Jim, and Don, especially for bringing this material through in co-creation with Ra. Thank you. Okay, so we're picking up on number 10, I believe, about Aleister Crowley. Did anybody want to or feel willing to start us off in our reading?
Oh, I can do.
Thanks, Caroline.
Okay. How far do you want me to go?
I think if you just do 10 and 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
Questioner, 1810, questioner. I see. The entity Aleister Crowley wrote, "Do what thou wilt" is the whole of the law. He was obviously an understanding to some extent of the law of one. Where is this entity now? Ra, I am Ra. This entity is within your inner planes. This entity is in a healing process. 1811, questioner. Did this entity then, even though he intellectually understood the law of one, misuse it and therefore have to go through this healing process? Ra, I am Ra. This entity became, may we use the vibration sound complex, overstimulated with the true nature of things. This overstimulation resulted in behavior that was beyond the conscious control of the entity. The entity thus, in many attempts to go through the process of balancing, as if we described the various energy centers, beginning with the red ray and moving upwards, became somewhat overly impressed or caught up in this process and became alienated from other selves. This entity was positive. However, its journey was difficult due to the inability to use, synthesize, and harmonize the understandings of the desires of self so that it might have shared in full compassion with other selves. This entity thus became very unhealthy, as you may call it, in a spiritual complex manner. And it is necessary for those with this type of distortion towards inner pain to be nurtured in the inner planes until such an entity is capable of viewing the experiences again with the lack of distortion towards pain.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Is anyone familiar with the work of Aleister Crowley?
Yes.
Any thoughts on this? And it's specifically if anyone has any, because I'm not so familiar, but if anyone has any like insights into what he was about, kind of in an overview sort of way, could be helpful.
I can say a few things. He was in the Order of the Golden Dawn, one of the founding members, I want to say, or very close to it. He was an adept magician. He explored many, many things. He, especially towards the second half of his life, had, as Ross, I'm very glad Ross stated, very unhealthy distortions. Although, because I've looked into his work as well as those surrounding it with the occult magics, and you could say there are healthy versions of it and there are also very unhealthy versions of it. And I'm not going to specify the unhealthy. You can literally Wikipedia him and you will see several examples of whoa. That being said, he was also onto something. There was a lot of experimentation with the occult magics, And he was successful at a lot of it. He was also, again, distorted heavily towards what would be considered very unacceptable behaviors and unhealthy. And again, those you can just Wikipedia if you're interested further. A lot of people today who consider themselves, just neo-pagan, witchy, or into the deeper occult houses, the use of white magic, quote unquote, versus dark magic, quote unquote, and things are blended. So that quote, do as you will, it's all part of the all, in a sense. There was a lot of service to self involved. I was actually surprised Ross said that he was on the positive path, but it went to his head. It definitely messed with his spirit complex and therefore messed with other spirit complexes and other selves that could tell that he was onto something. Like, there's truth here. Like, he's worth exploring. People still continue to read his biographies and still continue to look at his work and quote and use those things. And there is a very dark side to that was very service to self that I just don't even feel comfortable saying out loud. So like I said, if you want to explore further, the Wikipedia goes into a fair amount of that. That's the short version.
Yeah, thanks, Nia. Rachel, I saw you raise your hand. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Not too much. Definitely so I actually got my first time delving into Aleister Crowley. I was still a teenager and I was in high school. And even from then, which I'm still very naive when it comes to magical workings. And even then I was even more naive. But even then I could sense that there was a deep instability with the man, which made me uncomfortable. So I never pursued any of his rituals. I did recently listen to a podcast about him. It wasn't directly about him. It was about a manuscript that was found from the 1500s, which described an even older manuscript from a very, 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 very ancient magician that involves, I can't remember what the end product was, but the process of it involved calling in demons and stuff. And I'm not about that life. So I was very uncomfortable listening to it, but I was just like, who would even like at what point is the end result a good idea if that's the part of the ritual? But he did this in this house in England, and he had to leave the house because he never closed the circle or something. It became a really negative place. And now it's still uninhabited because people keep moving and leaving and moving and leaving. And so that's what I remember. But I did want to ask, so when Ross says that his behavior was beyond the conscious control of the entity, would we basically say that is like a mental, like a psychosis maybe, or like some form of mental illness? That was what I got from that. I'm not quite sure. I sometimes think about free will and in relation to certain distortions that involved what appears to be a lack of control on behalf of entities. So I was curious if you all thought that may have been what he was referring to.
Yeah, I had a similar, I was going to bring up that same statement that Ra made. And so my own personal response to it is, it's in this case, this is an entity he was working with all sorts of powers on the inner and outer planes. So in Crowley's case, behavior going beyond his conscious control I sort of imagine might be a little bit more pressurized by whatever wasn't in his conscious, like whatever powers he was tapping into that he wasn't fully aware of what he was doing, might have made the implications for him kind of like what you're saying, Rachel. It could have been, psychosis potentially, but I guess we don't really know. That Ra doesn't give enough information. I mean, I think that we all may have behavior that comes through that we participate in. It's beyond our conscious control. It could be fairly innocuous too. Just whenever our subconscious drives, cause us to like react while we're driving in, traffic or something like that. That could be behavior beyond our conscious control because it just comes up before we catch it through awareness and just act it out. Any little thing could fall in that category. But I think in his case, since he seems to be somebody who was participating and co-creating with some pretty major forces within himself and also from other entities, that it seems like it might have been a little bit more maybe like what you're talking about. It could have been a little bit more pronounced. And it to me it kind of like it makes me think of the upper and the lower triads of our chakra system, our energy system. And my intuitive sense is that Crowley was somebody who came in with a pretty well-developed upper chakra, upper triad. So maybe he was really sensitive to psychic forces and sensitive to higher powers that he was able to participate with. And it becomes even, my understanding of what Ra says, it becomes even more important for us to do the healing work on the personal level, on the lower three triad, the lower three chakras, so that we don't misuse that power. Because the more unbalanced we are or unintegrated we are in our lower triad, which just means like, where have we not accepted something in our own life experience? Where are we not accepting ourselves? Where are we not accepting our place in our society? Where are we not accepting the people in our lives? If we have spiritual power, if that being has spiritual power, there's a lot more possibility for those spiritual powers kind of coming out in a distorted way. And it seems like potentially that's what happened with Crowley.
I agree.
And the other thing is, I think Ra, this is just for context. I think Don was aware of Crowley's work because, as far as I know, Don's primary magic, he was a white magical practitioner, and his primary system that he was working in was the system of the ancient order of the Golden Dawn. So I'm sure he was well aware of Crowley's, work through that context. Any other comments there on Crowley?
I'll make one more comment. Things that I'm recalling because I read his stuff as a teenager, and then I've revisited it throughout because he's so influential, and I'm a spiritualist minister, and you can't avoid talking about occultists when you're in that realm. So, but the and this is personal opinion. This is my own distortion of his work and his writings, is that it is very strong in wisdom and not very strong in heart. It's almost like freedom. His path was so much like do what thou wilt, and the freedom was definitely there, but that heart and that part of us that doesn't want to harm others I don't think it was necessarily developed. Or maybe at one point it was, but because he says he was positive, so that means he was wanting to serve others. But I think that there was a big imbalance between his knowing of freedom and wanting people to be free internally, and that thing that sometimes holds us back from really doing what we want to do, that is also a heart-based impulse. So that's my own personal opinion and my distortion. That's all of me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm inclined to move on. I'm pretty I feel like the Yahweh portion of this is the piece of this, what we have left to read, that I'm the most interested in. And I specifically want to make sure that we get to it with some time for Neil to be able to maybe share. Neil, I'm so excited that you're paying so close attention to this and, you know, taking a little extra time to understand it, because it is pretty, I think it's a pretty impactful part of our history on Earth. And it is a pretty difficult dynamic to understand. So I'd like to keep us moving. So let's continue reading from 1812. Anyone else feel like reading?
I can read.
Great.
How many questions would you like me to read? I
Let's
think it
see.
helps when you say ahead of time so we're not wondering.
Let's just do 2, 12 and 13.
Okay. Questioner, you stated yesterday that forgiveness is the eradicator of karma. I am assuming that balanced forgiveness for the full eradication of karma would require forgiveness not only of other selves, but forgiveness of self. Am I correct? I am Ra. You are correct. We will briefly expand upon this understanding in order to clarify. Forgiveness of other self is forgiveness of self. An understanding of this insists upon full forgiveness upon the conscious level of self and other self, for they are one. A full forgiveness is thus impossible without the inclusion of self. Questioner, thank you. A most important point to my way of thinking. You mentioned that there were a number of confederations. Do all serve the infinite creator in basically the same way, or do some specialize in some particular types of service? I am Ra. All serve the one creator. There is nothing else to serve, for the creator is all that there is. It is impossible not to serve the creator. There are simply various distortions of this service. As in the Confederation, which works with your peoples, each Confederation is a group of specialized individual social memory complexes, each doing that which it expresses to bring into manifestation.
Thank you. Okay, let's take the first one first. Karma and forgiveness, self and other self. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I was thinking, I know this is the law of one, but I was thinking this is the real pinnacle of A Course in Miracles. It is self-forgiveness, which enables you to forgive the world. And there is a lesson that says to the effect, today I forgive the world. And the more I've delved into the law of one and also A Course in Miracles, that is the linchpin to the eradicator of karma. But I like the fact that it's mentioned it's about self-forgiveness. It's to release judgment and all of those kind of lower entity emotions that get us catapulted. But my understanding, my personal opinion is this is the key to leave out of here on the highest timeline that I possibly can manifest. It is to forgive the world and to see everybody as my brothers and sister. But whatever harm I do or whatever I have done, I've done to myself through them. I'm using them as teachers to grow and to evolve. But balanced forgiveness, it really is, to me, it starts with self. And full forgiveness is the most, to me, it's the most important piece of this conscious evolution. So I like the interplay or the intersection, to me, of the Course in Miracles with this, directly with this particular topic.
Yeah. Cool. That's neat to hear. Anyone else? Yeah, Amanda.
It reminds me of something of a quote from session 32-1 that I just keep coming back to all the time, which is give thanksgiving for each moment, see the self and the other self as the creator, open the heart. And I think that right there, that remembering that the other self is the creator, that I am the creator, the other self is the creator. And just that seems to put me into a state of being able to forgive that which I have like a hard time in the moment of forgiving, or the person that I have a hard time in the moment of forgiving.
Yeah, totally. I resonate with that. And I love that perspective of yeah, bringing in that quote. Thank you. Sean, welcome. I didn't see you pop in. I'm glad you're here. What do you got?
Yeah, sorry, I'm still late. I cannot control my schedule anymore. So forgiveness is mentioned a lot in Law of One, and I was wondering if like someone could sort of define it a little better, because like, how do you know when you forget? Like, I really liked what Carolyn said about forgiving the world, but like, what does that mean? Like, how do you know when you've reached a condition of forgiveness? Like, surely there's, our words suck. Like Ra says, our language sucks. So like, how would Ra define it if he were to be more technical?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Sean. And oh, BJ raised her hand. I was going to ask you, BJ, I'd love to hear anything you have to say. And specifically, I'm wondering if you could speak to the way that Byron Katie talks about forgiveness, right? Like realizing that what you think happened didn't actually happen, that one. If that resonates for you, or anything else you want to say. Curious to hear from you.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna share. That is Byron Katie's definition of forgiveness that really resonates for me. Like forgiveness isn't like me putting up with what you did or me forgiving you. It's a change in understanding. And so specifically her definition is forgiveness is coming to see that what you thought happened didn't happen. And which can mean so many different things, you know, like, you know, for instance, like if somebody hit me, you know, it wouldn't be necessarily coming to see that they didn't hit me, you know, like, okay, their hand actually came towards my face and it actually like made contact with my face. But the meaning that I make of it, or, you know, what isn't forgiven is the meaning that I make of it, or the identity that I make of it, or what I think that means about them, or what I think that means about the world. And the pain that we carry about that is based on a misunderstanding. You know, it's based on some assumptions and some identities that aren't, Victor's here, that aren't real or aren't true. And it's always going to be different assumptions or understandings. And thus, you know, it requires the inner work and coming to see, well, what am I making that mean? What is the pain that I'm carrying about that action that happened? But anyway, that definition is really helpful to me, because otherwise it's like, it's still like, if it's like me forgiving you, it still is like some ego implied, like I forgive you for what you did, you know? So to me, that's really helpful. Like, oh, it's actually coming to see that what I thought happened isn't what happened. So it's inner work.
Thanks, BJ.
Yeah.
Caroline?
I'm totally, I totally resonate with that. And that is the Course in Miracles concept as well. But to take it further, it's for me to understand that we're all doing the best we can, given this present level of consciousness that we possess. So I look at it like, yeah, something did occur, those things played out on an ego battlefield, but I realize that according to a Course, and it's insanity playing out, this person is not in their right mind. And so I don't say it never happened, but forgiveness is the realization for me that they don't understand that their divinity, I suppose. It sounds kind of weird maybe, but it enables me to to develop compassion and to have the understanding that we're all doing the best we can. And so that didn't happen because that person was in their right mind. That happened because that person was not on the right mind. But we're all on the same path, but we're just in different places. But it's to recognize my brothers and sisters are, hurting too, or they're not playing with, a sense of divinity. They don't know their true nature. So forgiveness for me is not just saying it didn't occur, it's understanding that this person's understanding of the world is caught in ego, and that is how they are acting out their own belief systems.
Yeah.
So is it like a clearing of any blockages, preventing like unconditional love? Is that what it is?
I mean,
Sounds
essentially,
right
yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
Anything that would keep me separate from you is not your doing, it's my doing. So taking responsibility for that.
And building
Yep.
on what Caroline said, it's like still seeing that like they have issues, but still loving them. Realizing their issues are theirs. But that you can still love them.
And don't take anything personally, right? No.
Yes.
And it, for me, I mean, it comes into play in a deeper level when you're dealing with like family of origin, and those kinds of things. I remember reaching a place where I could understand that these individuals I incarnated with as a family of origin are working their own divine path, but we're just not in the same place. We're not resonating. So the compassion I could feel of, you're just doing the best you can, but this is not about me. It's where you are. You just send love, divine love is very healing.
Okay, Neil.
Kind of all along the same route, I guess, but I kind of see it as like a big round dinner table, and my family's up there in spirit, not in physical body, and we're all like planning out our lives, and my brother's programming, all right, these are the buttons that I'm going to push, and they're going to help you develop your inner seeking. And my dad had a certain set of things, and we're all going to work through these, but on a higher level, we've made these conscious choices to come here, but then we forget through the veil of forgetting, and we make all these choices. And like, once you get to the other side, you realize that your, soul group and a person in that soul group was your worst enemy in high school that pushed all your buttons and forced you to think a different way. So you just forgive them because they are playing a role, like everyone's kind of playing a role to help you get to a new understanding. And when you're able to see that and know from like Jesus on the cross, like, I forgive you, you're killing me, but I know what's beyond, and that you are unaware of that, and you're only acting this way from being unaware. So how sad that you're not aware enough to act from love, and it's all this fear. So, and I've been holding on to a lot of anger from my brother, and like, how could you have bullied me, and how could my dad, be an alcoholic in front of me, and just these things that I've come to recognize. And it's like, no, they acted these certain ways, and I forgive them, and that released the anger towards them when I realized kind of where they were coming from. So it is kind of this like infinity symbol of forgiving, and it's all just wrapped together. And
Yeah. I want to kind of add my little perspective on this and tie it in with a few things that have already been said, which is like, seeing all beings as a creator, seeing the self and others as a creator as a part of it for me. And also, pretty much everything everyone said. And the thing that helps me is, I came to this realization at a certain point that consciousness is unified. It's singular. Like, we're all making our choices based on the consciousness that's moving through us. It's the same consciousness. Like, to think that we would make a different choice in someone else's shoes is an error, is an illusion. if we had the same experiences and the same biases, and we were working with the same set of, data that someone else was working with, we 100% would make the same choices that they make, because it's the same consciousness making the choice. It's all the same consciousness. We're all being moved by the same consciousness. And kind of like, once I realized that, it really unlocked my capacity to look again, at the things that I don't accept, and realize like, oh, well, I mean, how can I blame someone if I was in their shoes, if I had been through what they had been through, I would have done the same thing. For sure, I would have done the same thing. And that insight has helped me work with the concept of and the process of forgiveness. And then in the work of Byron Katie, and in the process and the practice that BJ and I have been practicing for a really long time, the way that the way you go about it is you just notice where you suffer. You notice where you judge people. You notice where you like, I can't believe that happened. Or, you just, throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout the cycles of your life, you just pay attention to what gets your goat. And if something's still getting your goat, there's something you haven't forgiven. And, it's not as simple as saying, okay, I'm just going to forgive them. It's not a mental process. You have to really get in there and bring kind of a meditative awareness. In my experience, bring a meditative awareness and let it show you what it needs to show you. Because that's ultimately the point, is like, it's instructive. It's part of our school. It's part of the way that we inform ourselves as to our true nature and our true heart. That's my little piece.
I like that, Aaron. Thanks. That's definitely going to give me food for thought, and I'm going to chew on that. The idea that the consciousness is all. I mean, yeah. The way
Cool.
you phrased that was spot on. That's going to give me something to meditate on. Thanks.
Cool. That's great. And just as a sort of like historical note, every time we've been through this, which I think is at least, I guess it's just twice, maybe 3 times now, over the years studying forgiveness, this always happens. Like, it's such a simple concept, but we're always like, wait, what is forgiveness? And how do you actually do it? And, it's always like surprisingly, what's the word I'm looking for? Elusive. It's like, it seems so simple, but when you actually like, all right, I want to forgive. Well, how do I actually do that? And it's always so interesting and rich to have the conversation about what how different people work with it. And I appreciate everything everyone said. Okay, so the next one, Confederations and service and the types of service. Any thoughts on 18.13?
Can I just add one little piece to 12?
Sure, of course.
And bouncing off of what you said earlier, Aaron, I think for me, a barometer of forgiveness is how much anything still triggers me.
Yeah.
And I've sensed now there's a lot of the ego has less to do. I'm putting it out of business at this point in terms of the forgiveness factor with individuals and all of that. And I love that part, because in the end, really, once the karma of relationships is ended, all that remains is love and compassion. And so what does not trigger me has healed in me. And that is, like you say, my first journey into this was, what is forgiveness? And coming from a Christian background, this was extremely distorted. And so I had to learn what true forgiveness is. But I think that just a quick barometer is the trigger factor.
Yeah. I agree so much. And I just really appreciate you saying in the very beginning, like, how much you think that, forgiveness is such a key activity. And I agree with you. I mean, I honestly think if there was one thing that we were to try to place our attention on in terms of, getting what we came for and showing up for life, like, forgiveness is probably, if not number 1, it's in the top 3 for sure. So key. Yeah. So thanks for saying that, Caroline.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like forgiveness is like an integration of difficult experiences almost. It's like it's the only way for the creator to integrate difficult. Yeah, if you don't forgive, you haven't integrated the experience. And like, the whole point of existence is like integrating experiences. I mean, the easy experiences are easy to integrate, but the difficult ones, if you haven't forgiven, you haven't as the creator, like it hasn't been integrated into the creator hasn't fully taken that experience in. I don't know. It was just another perspective on the
Absolutely.
purpose of forgiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, just to sort of like, to put a little plug in for what we'll be, getting into much later in this study in the archetypical mind, it's catalyst and experience. Catalysts are the challenging things that get our attention. But if we don't, if we don't look at them again and figure out how to integrate them, like you said, Shang, we go back to the beginning and we draw them towards ourselves again through the matrix and the potentiator, and then they come up in our lives again. And if we don't figure out how to seat them through experience, then we'll just keep doing it. We'll keep looping. But if we do figure out how to integrate those experiences, it leads to transformation. And it leads to that's what soul growth comes from, is actually seeding those experiences and integrating them. It's totally true. It's a great
Well,
point.
I got something on that to kind of coattail on that, Chong. Your love light and your light love. If you are not completely and wholly, deeply integrating forgiveness, then your light is kind of like smudged. There's like a dimness to it. It's almost like a dirty light. It's like it's not clean. You're not truly shining love light in the purest sense. And this is, like you said, it's one of the many catalysts to bring forward the purity of the love light, a non-distorted version of it, like the Buddha and Jesus and those that have, hit that state of enlightenment. They glowed. You could see their light and know that they're love, and that was on an ultimate and a really pure level. So for us to be able to get to that point, top 3. I'm with you on that, Aaron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. BJ? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, for the sake of time, I'm just going to read again Ra's first paragraph in response to Don's question. All serve the one creator. There is nothing else to serve, for the creator is all that there is. It is impossible not to serve the creator. There are simply various distortions of this service. I mean, it's so like, that's a profound statement. And I just want to make a little time. Let's be brief, because I do want to move us into the Yahweh portion. But any thoughts on any of that? Does that bring anything up, or any insights or comments on that? Neil?
Got the inner image of, no matter what happens, this whole solar system being pulled into a black hole, and the creator just learning from, the suicidal tendencies of Maldek exploding themselves, and like Atlantis, and the positive, the negatives, everything kind of coming back, and it just learns and goes, okay, interesting, love it, thank you. And no matter what, good, bad, whatever you are, it's a learning to the creator. So there's really no other thing in the end but loving acceptance from that original source. So you can't really do wrong, even if you are thinking that you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Anyone else want to share anything on that? Well, it's just kind of like you were saying, Neil, like you were giving us, you were sort of painting a picture of what the creator, how the creator might reflect on, such a vast scale of experience of a whole solar system, all the life, all the planets. And I think that what they're saying here, you can't get from the perspective solely of being a limited self, you will never get what they're talking about. Like what they're talking about is a sixth density teaching. It's very much of the sixth ray. It's very much a transpersonal perspective on what's going on in life and in the universe. And so that's the key, is like, you know, if you try to get that, and you know, you're really seeing it from the perspective of experiencing yourself as a separate self, it won't ever land. It's a highly transpersonal and cosmic and universal view to see that that's the case. BJ?
Yeah, I feel like it just connects. It connects back to the piece about forgiveness for me, and specifically in the way that you're looping in the work of Byron Katie. One of the biggest sort of takeaways for me from that practice is basically to follow my own advice. Like whatever advice I have for someone else, however I think that someone else should be living, then that's my guidance to live. And I feel like that's such a profoundly balancing frame of reference, to just consider, what is it that I think would be right action for everyone else, especially where I judge them or I don't forgive them, but even where I praise someone or uplift someone, you know, where I think someone's doing a beautiful thing, whatever it is that I think that I project out there, I think is so often our guidance that we don't tend to make use of because we lose track of it. You know, we just put it out there, but it's like, oh, when I realize that was for me, that helps me be like exactly where I need to be.
Yep. Can we take our own advice? Yeah. Great. Okay, well, hopefully it works for y'all. I want to move us on. So let's get into 1814. Anyone want to read? Maybe, let's see. So we have 13 QAs left. Let's read like half of it. So let's read like 6 or 7.
I'll read.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I got a computer. I can read now. Okay, we're at, you said 1814?
1814, yeah.
And you said read 7.
Yeah, read like, 6 or 7. It's like to
All
20
right.
or 21.
Okay. Okay. Questioner, can you tell me how Yahweh communicated to Earth's people? Ra, I am Ra. This is a somewhat complex question. The first communication was what you would call genetic. The second communication was the walking among your peoples to produce further genetic changes in consciousness. The third was a series of dialogues with chosen channels. Questioner, can you tell me what these genetic changes were and how they were brought about? Ra, I am Ra. Some of these genetic changes were in a form similar to what you would call the cloning process. Thus, entities incarnated in the image of the Yahweh entities. The second was a contact of the nature you would know as sexual, changing the mind-body-spirit complex through the natural means of the patterns of reproduction devised by the intelligent energy of your physical complex. Questioner, can you tell me specifically what they did in this case? Ra, I am Ra. We have answered this question. Please restate for further information. Questioner, can you tell me the difference between the sexual programming, let us say, prior to Yahweh's intervention and after intervention? Ra, I am Ra. This is a question which we can only answer by stating that intervention by genetic means is the same no matter what the source of this change. Questioner, can you tell me Yahweh's purpose in making genetic sexual changes? Ra, I am Ra. Hang on. No? Sorry. The purpose, 75000, 75,000 years ago, as you measure time, of the changes subsequent to that time were of one purpose only, that to express in the mind-body complex those characteristics which would lead to further and more speedy development of the spiritual complex. Questioner, how did these characteristics go about leading to the more spiritual development? I am Ra. The characteristics which were encouraged include sensitivity of all the physical senses to sharpen the experiences and the strengthening of the mind complex in order to promote the ability to analyze these experiences. Questioner, when did Yahweh act to perform the genetic changes that Yahweh performed? Ra, I am Ra. The Yahweh group worked with those of the planet you call Mars 75,000 years ago in what you would call the cloning process. There are differences, but they lie in the future of your time-space continuum, and we cannot break the free will law of confusion. Ooh. The 2,600 approximately time was the second time. We correct ourselves. 3,600 approximately, the time of attempts by those of the Orion group during this cultural complex. This was a series of encounters in which the ones called Anak were impregnated with the new genetic coding by your physical complex means so that the organisms would be larger and stronger. Questioner, why did they want larger and stronger organisms? Ra. Oh, he doesn't say I am Ra right there. The ones of Yahweh were attempting to create an understanding of the law of one by creating mind-body complexes capable of grasping the law of one. The experiment was a decided failure from the view of the desired distortions due to the fact that rather than assimilating the law of one, it was a great temptation to consider the so-called social complex or subcomplex as elite or different and better than other selves. This one of the techniques of service to self.
Great. That's a good stopping point for now. Thank you, Rachel. Okay. So is it making sense, the order of operations and the different kinds of communication that Yahweh had with the people of Earth? Are the sort of facts of the matter feel pretty understandable to everybody? Are there any questions about what we're talking about here? Everybody kind of gets what we're talking about? Okay, cool.
Hey,
Great.
quick question. That second one, that second intervention, the sexual one, did he say it was the Orion group that did that? Or was that the original?
No, I think it was the original Yahweh.
The one that was 3,000? Was that second one? And what's the date of that second one? 3,000 years ago?
Yeah, 3,600 years ago, they landed and mated with Earthlings and produced offspring that were bigger. They were like, giants, basically.
And the
And
third
they're known
one,
in-
sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. They're known in in our history as the Anak or the Anunnaki.
I always thought the Anunnaki had a really negative connotation.
Well, see, this
Maybe not,
this is why I wanted to give a little extra time for this, because y'all, this topic of Yahweh and everything that is included in that dovetails with the topic of the Anunnaki, and both of these topics are highly contested. There's like lots of different opinions about what they're really about who these beings are, what was their nature, what were the implications historically, what are the implications today. So it bears, in my opinion, it bears slowing down and really trying to unpack this and make sense of like, what are we really talking about here?
I
And the
was under
third
the
one-
assumption, oh, I'm sorry, apologies.
Oh, just a quick last quick clarification. The
Yeah.
third one, the last one, the channeling.
Yeah.
Is that the Orion group, or are all of these? So there's two Yahwehs. I think there's two. Might be more than two. There's the original Confederation one, and then there's the Orion impersonators, so-called impersonators.
Yep.
Is the third one referring to the channeling? Is that third one the Orion one?
Yeah, it's the original Yahweh communicating with Moses and all the other people who were, as I understand it, the reincarnating souls that Yahweh originally assisted, who were from Mars.
So in that third one, it was the original Yahweh until the Orions managed to pollute it.
That's right.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
I was under the assumption, and this is a good time for me to clarify, when I've read this before, I thought the second communication was the form of Jesus Christ walking with people on the earth. No.
No,
Okay.
incorrect. No, it's
Ooh.
before Jesus's lifetime. The second one happened
Okay.
a long time before Jesus's lifetime. And it was, it was landing. As far as I understand, it was like Yahweh sending emissaries from their social memory complexes to land on Earth and mate with Earthlings. So it's an ET interbreeding program.
Yeah. I saw that as all the first, but I thought there was an incarnation of Christ as the second. And I've only unpacked Law of One on my own, not with a group, and that's what I thought. So this is very interesting for me. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we never learn from Ra which social memory complex, which higher density social memory complex that Jesus was traveling from. It's possible that Jesus was traveling from the Yahweh group, but we don't know.
He's referred to as Yahweh as well. I've known that for a long time. Another name for Jesus is this one, Yahweh. And the reference is, not made all across the board, but I knew he was from way before an incarnation on this earth plane. But I was always under the assumption, as I unpacked Ra, that the second communication is when he came to earth to shift the vibration into a fourth density consciousness amongst the peoples of that time.
Yeah. As far as I'm reading it, Jesus's life doesn't actually fit into either three of these communications from Yahweh.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying that Jesus wasn't from Yahweh. I think there's a very good chance of that. I just don't know. But I think that they're talking here about these three forms of communication. The first one was when they made the transfer from Mars, the Mars beings to Earth. They did cloning. They did like a genetic, they changed the body complexes. They changed the genetics of the Martians. They added some of their own genes to make them more like the Yahweh group, and then deposited them on Earth for continuing their third density cycling. That was the first communication. And then the second communication was coming back, visiting again and landing, and the interbreeding program. And the third was the channeling. So communicating, through thought on the inner planes to Moses, potentially to some of the other prophets that we know from the Bible, potentially to Abraham, but teaching the law of one, teaching positive spiritual principles through these channels. That was the third.
But then that third got hijacked by the Orion group.
With Moses specifically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a key piece. And that's the piece that has cascading implications, because I don't know the Bible very well, but when I have read the Bible, and I think if you read the Bible, you can see that there's a little bit of a schizophrenic sensibility of the creator, like the creator is known as Yahweh. Yahweh
That's a good way to put it.
The one true God is Yahweh. And there's some depictions of Yahweh that seems more like an Orion being. And there's some depictions of Yahweh that seem more like a positive being. And then there's also depictions in the Bible of the one infinite creator, of the concept of the one being, the one infinite creator, as Ra calls it. That's not an evolving being. So it's a little bit of there's like three different sensibilities of God in the Bible as I read it.
That's one of those moments when I was a kid and I got kicked out of Sunday school class because I was like, these don't add up.
Right.
They're like, but it has to, because it's here in the book, and the book says that it's right. And it's like, wait, I'm like 6 years old with my hand raised going, something doesn't add up here. Could you please explain? No, that's the devil making you ask these questions. Wait, what? It's just logic, people.
Yeah, totally. Rachel?
Yes. Okay. So I have a bit of a sensitive question. At least it feels sensitive in 2023. based on, I had a really long, beautiful conversation with one of my best friends yesterday, who is an Orthodox Jewish woman. And we were talking about Old Testament stuff. And, you know, their belief, you know, that they are Yahweh's chosen people. When I read Genesis, and when I read the Law of One material, this particular area, there's a lot of there are a lot of correlations between this and Genesis. And Yahweh, they say, you know, the gods mated with men and everything. They don't like, you know, there's contention about gods being plural there, but it corresponds to what we're reading now. Is it fair to assess that Yahweh's, the cloning process and the mating process, because the religion was formed, that these are the Semitic peoples that we're talking about?
Semitic meaning the Jews?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Enochs are possibly the other inhabitants of that region, because obviously the Anunnaki, that was Mesopotamian. That's the other thing. It's kind of funny that I didn't read this ahead of time, but all week I've been listening to an Anunnaki archivist researcher guy podcast. So it's kind of cool. Okay, but my second thing was, it says that this is a clarification question. There was a series of encounters which the ones called Enoch were impregnated with new genetic coding. So the Orion group tiddled with the Enoch and changed the Anunnaki or the Enoch's genetic coding, correct?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay.
That's what I understand.
So my last question says, there are differences, but they lie in the future of your time-space continuum, and we cannot break the free will law of confusion. What is that? I mean, we can only speculate,
Yeah,
because the future, but
I mean, I'm curious too, if anyone has any, you know, if anyone has any insights into that, I would love to hear it too. I don't really know what to make of that. But basically, I mean, the conflict between Israel and the Israelis and Palestine seems to be one of the, you know, longest running. I mean, it seems to me like it's a direct descendant. That conflict is a descendant, historical kind of outpicturing of everything we're talking about now. Like, that's been going on for 3,600 years. There's a holy war dynamic playing out that that involves, you know, the idea of, you know, chosen people. Basically, that God prefers one group of people over another, and it's sort of still raging. I mean, raging. You know, it's such a difficult. Such a difficult, old, complex, you know, conflict. It's coming from what we're reading right now. Is how I understand it. Yeah, Neil, I want to give you some chance. I saw your hand was raised. I know you said you had to leave. I don't know if you have time to maybe share anything you want to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worthy of laying out kind of in a PowerPoint potentially, or have it kind of more easily dove into, because Quo sheds a lot of light and a more friendly way of speaking than the kind of raw encrypted 6 density level of understanding. So I have like all these posts and everything, and I can try to put this together, but I've just, you know, found that it's so incredible that they say Yahweh was a 6.5 density entity that came from the sun and is part of the guardianship of this solar system. And they worked with another Confederation member, Monka, and they went to the council and said, we would like to transfer these Martian souls to Earth. And give them the cloning, and it was approved, but also those of Ra and other, higher Confederation members are like, that's a terrible idea. They're going to create empires and elitism and all this stuff. And it's, it played out that way exactly like in this moment today. And it just so confused on how that didn't cross their minds of making someone superior, that they weren't going to try to take resources and protect their own from once being veiled. So I have a lot and would like to like dive into this separately if people are interested, because it really like goes back to the whole way Earth, and yeah, I don't know, but I really have to go. So I truly appreciate it, and look forward to watching the rest of this and see what you guys talk about. And much love. Have a great.
Cool. Thanks, Neil. I think there's lots of excitement for that, and I think we'd all enjoy that.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Caroline, did you have your hand raised? You're muted.
I was waving goodbye.
Oh, God, got it.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
For clarification. That second intervention where the Orion group are also involved. The Orion group is not the one doing the sexual change. The Orion group is just trying to like pass negative philosophy, and then the Yahweh, the positive group, is the one doing the sexual genetic transfer. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And then the Orion group, okay, so then you've got these beings now that are like larger and stronger than everyone around them. And the Orion group starts whispering to them, oh, you're so strong, you're so tall, you're so much better than everyone else, you should seize power, like whatever. Like the Orion group's able to like then use that difference that the genetic campaign created, was created by Yahweh in order to help the beings be more capable of understanding the law of one. But the Orion group were able to whisper in the ears of those that were now distinctly different genetically than those around them, and kind of like pressurize their capacity to think of themselves as elite and as special and as chosen and as different and as God's, deserving race or whatever. And that seemed to be very effective fodder for the Orion philosophy. BJ?
What's interesting to me, or there's a lot that's interesting, but one thing that's really interesting to me about that, campaign to create a superior race is that it feels in recent history really similar to the Nazi agenda, which was played out specifically against the Jewish people. Just super fascinating.
Right. Totally. So fascinating. Joshua.
Okay. And also, after so this would be in the time of Noah in the Bible, right? When the angels came down and bred with the people, right? Is this what it's being talked about? And they created.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? It sounds
Yeah.
likely.
And like the book of Enoch, that was like erased from the Bible, and lots of missing Bible books that talk about miracles and stuff. I think I'm finding a lot of similarities with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. And then it was said that what they were wiped out in a great flood, the giants and the angels from that time.
Yeah.
I was wondering how that correlated with what we're talking about, or if anyone has any thoughts of that on that.
It makes me wish I was more if I was more versed in the Bible. I have, tried to read it a couple times, but I've never studied the Bible, and I certainly don't feel like I am well educated, but boy, do I imagine that if somebody who, like, if we as a group or through some collaboration were able to like do a series of conversations about comparing the story as it comes through in the in the Old Testament, in the Bible, and the New Testament to whatever degree it's relevant, and what Ra teaches would be fascinating.
Yeah,
Would be so fascinating.
I think it's hard to study something that is not complete. Is like missing 12 books or like 12 chapters.
Right. Well, and it comes to us as a book, but it
Mm.
was made up of like different writings of different authors across millennia. I mean, not millennia necessarily, but at least across centuries. Like the books of the Bible were written, you know, through a long, very different eras. So,
Well, yeah, and some of it could be thousands of years old too, because they seem to have a lot of similarities with ancient Babylonian stories, like the snake in the garden and the flood
right.
and giants and angels.
Yeah. Totally. Nia. We can't hear you, love.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. To coattail on what Joshua said, something I don't know how many people realize or not is that the Bible, quote unquote, that people study today is 99% the King James Version, which was written 500 years ago, rewritten. Things were taken out, things were added in specifically because King James had an agenda. And as a king, he could say, this is what the church, and this gets into a political aspects. Y'all can further study that. Now, that's only 500 years ago. Then we talk about all these books that were left out. They're literally finding books. The Dead Sea Scrolls is one of the more well-known versions of that, where there's legitimately, I think more people know about the Book of Mary, and there's other books that were specifically left out. And so the Bible that people know today was simply the King James Version, which is a distorted version of the previous versions and all these books that were left out. That being said, the Bible version before the King James was still distorted 300 and some odd years after the life of Christ, which then you get into when they put the Old Testament and the New Testament together. The New Testament also had an agenda then, which was written by the church, which historically speaking was a political power and money agenda as well, even down to the sacrificial lambs and incense that needed to be bought. And I mean, this is a really complex, multi-layered aspect here, which you, like you said, somebody who's adept at this. I mean, there's a bajillion podcasts out there, and even priests who are Catholic priests even, who are like, dude, we just found some books in the basement. This changes everything, you know? And they're like, wait, this was hidden. You weren't supposed to say that out loud, dude. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, you know? And they're like, oops, well, it's out there now. And they look at the history of it rather than a religious belief system. And so that flips things on its head as well. So there is that's almost an endless study, you know, just my tip of the iceberg looking into that historically speaking has been just poof, mind-blowing in and of itself. And we get into the like even Ra landing and being this golden light bodied to the Egyptians, and was like, oh yeah, oops, they distorted the law of one and used it for a hierarchy and the elitism that Ra talks about just with Ra's landing, let alone all these other landings and points of history and the elitism that showed up around that. And the difference in the Anunnaki were considered gods that came down and used man as resource harvesting slaves, and then bred to make them bigger and more capable of harvesting gold and ore and other things. And then it just, woo, it's a lot, y'all.
It's
This could be
totally
a
a lot.
whole section on its own.
Yeah, I agree. I see hands up. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna read the next 4 because I just want to make sure we get through them before the end of our time, and then we'll just use the rest of our time for discussion. So let me just read the final content portions of this session, and then we'll open it up again for discussion. So just hold on to your comments for a second. 1822, questioner. Then the Orion group, I'm not quite sure that I understand this. Do you mean that the Orion group produced this larger body complex to create an elite so that the law of one could be applied in what we call the negative sense? I am Ra. This is incorrect. The entities of Yahweh were responsible for this procedure in isolated cases as experiments in combating the Orion group. However, the Orion group were able to use this distortion of mind-body complex to inculcate the thoughts of the elite rather than concentrations upon the learning, teaching of oneness. Questioner, well, was Yahweh then of the Confederation? I am Ra. Yahweh was of the Confederation, but was mistaken in its attempts to aid. Questioner, then Yahweh's communications did not help or did not create what Yahweh wished for them to create. Is this correct? I am Ra. The results of this interaction were quite mixed. Where the entities were of a vibrational sum characteristic which embraced oneness, the manipulations of Yahweh were very useful. Wherein the entities of free will had chosen a less positively oriented configuration of some total vibratory complex, those of the Orion group were able, for the first time, to make serious inroads upon the consciousness of the planetary complex. Questioner, can you tell me specifically what allowed the most serious of these inroads to be made by the Orion group? I am Ra. This will be the final full question. Specifically, those who are strong, intelligent, etc., have a temptation to feel different from those who are less intelligent and less strong. This is a distorted perception of oneness with other selves. It allowed the Orion group to form the concept of the holy war, as you may call it. This is a seriously distorted perception. There were many of these wars of a destructive nature. Okay, let's pick up again. So, Rachel?
Yes. I have always been fascinated with this stuff, even before I came across the Law of One. Just knowing and understanding, various ways that creation myths have repeated themselves, or, there's common themes. But so the oldest Bible, the oldest unaltered Christian Bible, I'll say, is the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. And I've mentioned this before. I went through a period where I was actively visiting an Orthodox church, and I have an Orthodox Bible, which is partially based on the Ethiopian, and it has many of the books that are removed from the King James. So I would like to volunteer to go through that. I also have the books that are removed from it, which are not removed in the Ethiopian Orthodox version, I have access to. I also have access to Old Testament Hebrew and a limited knowledge of biblical Hebrew. And whatever I don't have knowledge of, my best friend is more than happy to help me with the Hebrew, because she loves, that's one of our bonding things, is we love talking about religion and Hebrew and stuff. We forget that the Old Testament is a Jewish text, and there are still many unedited versions of the Torah and the Tanya, which are the mystical teachings and etc. I mean, the Tanya is not Kabbalah mystic, but it's it's kind of like the Torah is the Orthodox, the rules, and then the Tanya is like that middle, and then the Kabbalah is the really mystical, and so the Tanya is kind of in the middle. But I have all of those, so I would like to kind of jump on Neil's bandwagon, and I don't know what he's planning on doing because he's talking about Quo. I would like to specifically address the Old Testament and the stories from a Jewish and using Jewish sources, as well as the Ethiopian Orthodox inspired Bible that I have, and correlate them to what we're reading now, and in other past parts of the Law of One material the Law of One material that we've covered. Because I mean, there is a lot of mistranslations with the King James, so I've always specifically avoided translations that come from that one. So I can possibly be of service if people would like, and maybe just have a document and do some correlating, and draw some lines and call it a day. I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but I feel called to offer that.
That sounds wonderful and really exciting. And I'm feeling really I'm feeling interested in contributing too. And I wonder if we could do like maybe we can just talk about this in the Telegram thread. We can sort of co-create a vision for how this could go, but maybe once a month, we could have special salons on, trying to like correlate what Ra teaches with what we know from the Bible and from, Christianity and from Judaism, and
from Mesopotamian sources. Those are really important too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can imagine that, we could get some other scholars of the Law of One and or from Christianity to, to participate if we wanted that. So let's chat about that on the threads.
Yeah, I like it.
Thanks, Rachel. That's exciting. Yeah, Joshua.
That's where I was going to, Rachel. Yeah, like you hit the hammer with the nail right there, like the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, and I studied that for a while too, because in a past life when I lived in Boston, I lived with a lot of Rastafarians who study the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, which yeah, cool. I look forward to that thread. Thank you for doing that. Yeah.
I'm feeling jazzed and excited about it too, y'all. I'm sitting here with a big grin. That lights me up. Let's do it. I love it.
Yeah, and to the degree, I mean, again, take what resonates and leave the rest. But to the degree that, we do get into this particular conversation and this topic, I think we have to call ourselves to balance. I mean, it's like sticking your, it's like dipping your toes, and I don't know what the metaphor is. Sorry, I'm losing it. But these are some of the most highly contested human sources of human conflict on the planet. It's like the amount of strife and conflict and war that come out of these topics and disagreements are not insignificant. So I think for us to be in our, highest contribution, it requires a lot of care, and sensitivity, which I totally experience here, by the way. Like I really appreciate the nature of our ability to traverse this content together, and seems just important to put a plug in there for like being really balanced and, compassionate, along with being wise. BJ?
Yeah, just a little piece from session 26. Dawn was asking about the Law of One and the Bible, and how to tell, which has more Law of One in it, the Old Testament or the New Testament, and how to tell what was Orion influenced. And Ra says, we can only suggest a careful reading and inward digestion of the contents. The understandings will become obvious. So Ra's like, go ahead, you'll know.
Yeah. Thanks, BJ. Caroline?
Yeah, I think something that jazzes me up is the New Testament from a conscious perspective. And when I first started delving into like how the stories were absorbed in my understandings from an egoic perspective of, not being full, not being awake, to then being awake. And I really unpacked Neville Goddard like big time when I first came into this journey. And I couldn't get enough of it. It was like I looked through the New Testament over and over again with different eyes, like different vision. And it was unbelievable how this entire New Testament, whether it was, things were left out or not, just what is presented in a modern Bible, but from the standpoint of a conscious perspective of Christ consciousness. And I became very drawn, and I still am, to the New Testament from a Christ consciousness perspective. And there's a lot of beautiful metaphors and analogies and stories that when you take out and you extract, like, just it's a story from day-to-day egoic living to like what it really is, it's mind-blowing and it's beautiful. And anyway, that lights my fire, is looking at the difference. The Old Testament's interesting in its own self, but when you go into consciousness and you unpack the New Testament, it's very different and exciting.
And does Neil Goddard, does he like look at the Bible from a different perspective?
Like I have all of his works.
Mm-hmm.
And so he unpacks like where the I am comes into play in these stories, I guess, as they're laid out from Christian perspective. But yeah, Neville Goddard is like, he was the father of law of attraction as well. But but he really unpacks the New Testament. And so I started going into like, what is Christmas from a conscious perspective? What is Easter from a conscious perspective? And he lays it all out, and it's it becomes exciting and new, but it's all from the level of I am presence and Christ consciousness.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
I've got one tiny thing.
Yep.
Thank you, Erin, for putting that plug in specifically in taking note that this subject matter is literally some of the largest, deepest, harshest conflicts that the human race has ever experienced. Having said that, as we move into this, keeping an awareness, keeping a compassion, keeping open mind, and heart-centered desire for understanding, working on that as a collective from different viewpoints and angles, that we call that in at the beginning of any session, moving forward into that sensitive topic. I love that. And I have a very great, deep appreciation for you bringing that up and acknowledging that, and appreciating everybody else's sensitivity and heart-centered understanding for the material and for each other in this process. So thank you, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Loving y'all.
Yeah. Thanks, Nia. Okay. Well, we're at 5:01. We're pretty much at time. Is there anything else anyone wants to say before we close?
I have one quick question. Maybe
Sure.
I can ask in Telegram.
You're welcome to ask it now if you want.
Okay. It was just on this topic of people, of entities from confederations seeding, and we understand that they weren't the only people to seed this planet. But now we understand the origins of the Semitic peoples, or that region, the Jewish peoples, and possibly the Mesopotamian peoples. It really just brings up questions of who seeded European peoples and the Native American peoples and the Asian peoples. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to put it in a box like that, like, oh, they were all seeded from the same thing, but the other people on the planet, other groups, not necessarily racial, but I wonder who else was tinkering where, because it says that part of the communication was genetic. And so I wonder if other entities were passing on communications genetically. Who were they and what were they passing? And
Yeah.
that might lead to a greater understanding of conflicts that we have on the planet and how we can possibly resolve those conflicts by understanding ourselves and our origins better.
Totally.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
would love to talk about that more also, because like
Yeah.
there's so many cell groups. Why would I assume the others didn't go through extensive genetic modification unless they all did? Like, why do the Martians need special genetics to live on Earth if there's like 12 different soul groups or whatever? Anyways, I would love to talk about that more online.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, I'll just say this comment as context, and then we can take it to the threads. But we know what Ra says, that there, in terms of soul origins, there's a variety of souls who have come to participate in third density life on Earth. There's 3 major influences and 13 or 16 minor influences, I can't remember, of soul origin. So right there, you've got like all this diversity of souls who didn't start here, and they must have like, different, the racial mind that they started with when they began their third density evolution was different than the Earth planetary mind or racial mind. And then there's genetic intervention from extraterrestrial races. And I think Ra says that there have been at least 23 different campaigns from different ET races that have intervened genetically. It wasn't just Yahweh. So, from a soul origins perspective and from a, maybe more contemporary genetic intervention perspective, that's got to be massively influential on the trajectory and the makeup of the human race and of humanity. And I think it's incredibly helpful to talk about it. I mean, it's like, it definitely impacts the way that we look at ourselves and the way we look at each other and the way that we look at history and the way that we look at like what's going on today. It feels to me like it invites us into a more sensitive and nuanced view of like, oh, that's why there's reasons why there's lots of conflict. And there's reasons why there's lots of different ideas about what humans should be up to and what civilization should look like. So being informed, at least about the possibilities of those things being true, seems to me quite helpful. And I think it's really good for us to be continuing to unpack all this stuff. So, and that's probably all that we have time for today without going too far over. So yeah, if we want to continue that conversation, I'm interested in it. We can continue it on the Telegram thread. And with that, I'm going to call it closed. Thank you all so much for this stimulating conversation. Really, really juicy as always. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you guys next time.
Yep. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mwah.
Bye.